The Chesapeake region of Virginia is rich in cultural artifacts of colonial America. Chief among these are the remnants of homes and farms where early Americans lived their day-to-day existence. Increasingly, historians have become more interested in the material culture and the lives of everyday people. This concern for social and cultural history has led archaeologists and architectural historians to seek out the technologies employed in ordinary vernacular architecture as a means to better understand the range of choices available to the common man. Early in the 17th century, the countryside toward the mouth of the James River attracted settlers. Colonists established homesteads at Blunt Point, Mulberry Island, along the Warwick River, Skiff's Creek, and other navigable streams. Early patents and deeds, while incomplete, reveal the Mulberry Island area as populated with large homes, plantations, and farms. Situated on the northwest bank of Mulberry Island, overlooking the James River, is the Matthew Jones House. A two-story brick home with impressive gable-end chimneys, it is a direct descendant of an early colonial homestead. The Matthew Jones House readily illustrates the transformation Virginia houses underwent from the pre-Georgian era to the late colonial. It highlights the increasing desire for room specialization and privacy that American society began to seek early in the 18th century.
The conversion of the house into a museum is the result of a cooperative effort involving the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, Fort Eustis, U.S. Army Training and Doctrine Command, Virginia Department of Historic Resources, National Park Service, and Colonial Williamsburg Foundation. Jim Melker, Chief Environmental Branch, Norfolk District, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, has personally managed and directed the 4 phases of this preservation project: historic preservation plan, design, construction, and interpretation. A visit to the Matthew Jones House allows specialists and laymen alike a rare look at the evolution of building practices of the early Chesapeake.
The museum is unique in that the building is not presented as a finished restoration, but rather as an artifact. The aim is to showcase those architectural features which are indicative of a particular time and place and illustrate transitions in technique and fashion. Most of these features would be hidden from the observer if the structure were restored to any one specific period. The Department of the Army has long appreciated the unique nature of the Matthew Jones House and the requirements for its proper management in compliance with the National Historic Preservation Act. In fact, the Matthew Jones family and house have been of interest to historians and government planners since the 1940s. At that time, under the auspices of the Historic American Buildings Survey of the Works Progress Administration, otherwise unemployed architects were assigned to conduct a measuring project to record the house. Armed with knowledge gained since the 1940s, and with more of the original fabric exposed to view, scholars have been better able to distinguish between the periods of alterations. They have also noted extensive evidence of change that was ignored by their predecessors. While listed on the National Register of Historic Places since 1969, it was only recently that funding for preservation of the house became available through the foresight of the Army. A series of academic investigations have addressed various aspects of the house's history. In 1980, an archaeological study was undertaken on the site by the College of William and Mary, Department of Anthropology, to assess the potential for a larger cultural and ecological study of Mulberry Island. However, the principal investigators terminated the project after just 6 days. They determined that the site had been too extensively disturbed by modern regrading associated with nearby construction projects, such as the post's sewage treatment facility, to warrant a full-scale archaeological excavation. In 1984 and again in 1986, the Army commissioned scientific studies of selected building timbers in an attempt to establish a precise date for construction of the Jones House. In 1988, the Army received the results of a 3-year archaeological survey, which, among other findings, discovered that Mulberry Island was divided into plantations and small tracts in the 17th century. Surviving records reveal the area was a popular place to settle. Mulberry Island was fortified by the Confederate Army between 1862 and 1863 as a defensive position during the Peninsula Campaign, yet saw little action. The peninsula's economy recovered slowly after the Civil War, and currency was scarce. The loss of a slave labor force, coupled with the reduction in the number of rural families due to war deaths, resulted in a sharp decline in acres tilled. Agricultural productivity dropped by more than half and farm size declined. As a result, the traditional nature of Mulberry Island survived until the late 19th century, when large tracts of land were subdivided due to impoverished landowners being forced to sell out. The failing fortunes of Henry Francis Jones, the last member of the family to own the property, eventually forced him to relinquish ownership to pay off debts in 1887. Subsequently, the house was greatly compromised by alterations. However, by its very existence today, the Matthew Jones House provides an historical glimpse into the changing social ambitions of the Chesapeake gentry over the past 200 years, and is an extraordinary example of an all but lost building tradition, the earth-fast house. Colonial Williamsburg architectural historian Willie Graham has examined scores of early structures.
During the 17th and 18th centuries, earth-fast construction was one of the most common framing systems employed in Virginia. The Matthew Jones House is the last remaining 18th century earth-fast building in the state, and that alone makes it an extremely important artifact.
Matthew Jones House project architect John Paul Hanbury, who is noted for helping direct the rescue of the Portsmouth Historic District and restoring Norfolk's Wells Theater, has equally strong feelings for the house.
The Matthew Jones House is probably one of the 10 best buildings in Virginia. It's truly an outstanding structure.
In examining a building believed to have historical or cultural significance, the investigator can gain much needed insight by inspecting construction techniques and materials. This reading of the architectural evidence of earlier builders assists in determining a likely time frame for the construction and subsequent renovations. Such a reading of the Matthew Jones House reveals it evolved through 3 distinct periods. During period 1, the house was of earth-fast construction with impressive gable-end chimneys. These chimneys were positioned by the original builder, Matthew Jones, to accommodate the planned transition to brick walls of the period 2 house. The interior was a typical pre-Georgian hall and chamber dwelling with a loft containing secondary unheated bedrooms. Work on the period 2 dwelling began in 1729 and was completed in 1730. As altered, it reflected building fashions of the 1730s and fulfilled Jones' expectations for his home. With substantially built brick walls, it now represented a modern home of an ambitious planter and incorporated the social trend toward increasing room specialization.
The house, in its most recent architectural form, is labeled Period 3. It must have appeared much as we see it today. This construction phase dates to 1893 and is representative of what was considered modern for middle-class housing late in the 19th century.
The Period 3 house was privately owned and continuously inhabited until World War I and the establishment of Camp Abraham Eustis. Private ownership of Mulberry Island properties came to an end as the U.S. government acquired the land for military purposes. During the 1920s and 30s, Army personnel resided in the house. Over the last few decades, the house fell into disuse and disrepair. At the urging of the Fort Eustis Historical and Archaeological Society, a rubber membrane covering was placed on the roof in 1988. This effort saved the structure from further water damage that could have reduced the home to an historic pile of bricks. In the latter half of 1990, the Army commissioned a study to determine the precise policy to be followed for conservation work on the Matthew Jones house. The policy needed to satisfy both the spirit and the letter of the National Historic Preservation Act. The staff of the William and Mary Archaeological Project Center was asked to prepare a preservation plan outlining management options for the Army. The resulting recommendations range from no action at all to a full restoration of the house to a specific historic period.
Of course, no action would have been tantamount to demolition by neglect, countering the intent of the Preservation Act and the Army's desires. Preservation was chosen over restoration since it posed the least risk of destroying the historic fabric of other periods. Ultimately, it was determined that the most appropriate use for the house would be as an architectural study museum. By taking a conservation approach and leaving exposed most of the early construction details, a new museum experience could be created. The focus of the exhibit is on the architecture and layers of fabric, not on the decorative arts or owners of the building.
The National Park Service agreed to perform the work with craftsmen from its Historic Preservation Training Program at Williamsport, Maryland. These personnel are expert at conserving original fabric and blending in replacement materials so as not to physically or visually impact the original structure in a negative manner.
The goal became to save the present physiognomy of the building, which can be seen as a visual record of everything that has happened to it through time. The accumulated physical evidence, this track of additions, deletions, and mutilations, is a prime historical resource.
The museum permits many of the architectural reading points and more interesting aspects of the structure to remain exposed for observation. The reading points, consisting of labeled building components, make up the exhibit and are keyed to a self-guided tour for visitors. When presented in this fashion, both the general public and the academic community interested in the architecture and social history of our past are able to study remains that have been all but lost elsewhere. Even though no attempt was made to restore the home in a traditional fashion, making the house safe for the visiting public and preparing it as an exhibit was no easy task. Oddly enough, the first step in preserving the house for its new role was a 6-week demolition effort. Years of neglect made it imperative that the building be thoroughly inspected and rendered structurally sound. The interior of the house was stripped of its post-World War I finish, exposing the remaining frame of the house. Effort was made to reinforce those areas compromised by neglect. Except for replacement of rotted floorboards and some late 19th century trim, the interior was made safe, but left essentially as it was before work began. The interiors had become a true showcase of architectural change, each layer of history now visible for the visiting public to contemplate. The exterior needed to be made watertight, and thus it was restored to its 1893 appearance, complete with replacement of sash where missing, and the addition of a new wood shingle roof to match fragments found in the attic. The brickwork was repaired using mortar, closely matching the original. By carefully examining the reading points now exposed and reviewing available historic evidence, a fairly accurate picture of the home's history could be developed. Attempts to research the earliest origins of the Matthew Jones house are hindered by the fact that most Warwick County court records of the pre-Civil War era have been lost. Many of these early records were carried off as war souvenirs by advancing Union forces, making it difficult to date the period one house with absolute certainty. However, the last will and testament of one Matthew Jones of Isle of Wight County provided the key to reconstructing the earliest ownership history for the house. According to available sources, Matthew Jones was a prosperous farmer and justice of the peace in Warwick County in the early 18th century. He had built a substantial earth-fast house with impressive brick chimneys, apparently with the intent of soon bricking the walls. Unfortunately, Jones's aspirations for a grander house were left unfulfilled due to his untimely death in 1728. The work of further transformation to the Period II house was continued by Jones's descendants and relatives. After he died, an inventory and appraisement of this property showed that he owned 2 houses and land in Warwick County. One was described as a new home divided into a chamber and hall. Historians feel confident that this house, subsequently referred to as the Brick House for many years and now named for Matthew Jones, was in all likelihood originally an earth-fast dwelling built about 1720. Remarkably, buried inside the 1730 brick shell are 6 wood members that represent the remains of the original earth-fast house constructed by Matthew Jones. Though earth-fast technology was quite common for the period, being used frequently on fairly modest dwellings as well as better built ones, none are known to survive in Virginia from the 18th century. A hole set or earth-fast structure is one in which at least the principal posts extend several feet into the ground, thus eliminating the need for foundations or continuous sills. Because of their impermanent nature, most have been replaced, destroyed by insects, or rotted away. Both the front and rear plates of the early earth-fast house survive within the later masonry wall, as do the 2 end joists and 2 riven knee wall studs. The rear plate located along the north wall extends the length of the house. It is decorated with a chamfer or bevel. Lamb's tongue stops are located on its lower interior edge and define where the corner and intermediate posts once stood. Earth-fast construction is further suggested by the presence of ghost evidence. When examined, buildings often reveal signs of earlier construction by indications that a framing member, floor joist, or other architectural feature has been altered, removed, or even previously used for a different purpose. These ghosts can include notches cut in wood that once received now missing framing members, and the remains of old plaster or paint. Ghosts for upbracing from the corner posts in the Jones house are indicative of earth-fast construction and led investigators to seek additional evidence to support this supposition. The upbraces would have replaced the more normal building practice of downbracing to the sill of the house. The presence of the ghosts of upbracing suggests that originally there were non-continuous sills. The upbraces used here were half-dovetail lapped and nailed to the plate. When foundations and brick walls were installed for the Period II house, braces were abandoned and the studs between the new shed and dining room were replaced, leaving evidence as to where the old framing was attached to the plate. The conclusion that the Period I house was earth-fast is further supported by the results of archaeological research. The most recent excavation importantly revealed a post hole for the original frame structure. In addition, 2 builders' trenches were investigated. One was associated with construction of the west chimney, while the second was created for the west foundation wall. Excavation revealed that the builder's trench of the west foundation wall cut into the trench associated with the chimney. This finding indicates that the chimney predates the brick wall of the house and entirely supports the conclusion that the 2 brick chimneys with their split stacks are original to the frame house. By 1730, the frame of the wooden clapboard earth-fast house was replaced with the more substantial brick walls during the Period II alterations. Matthew Jones built this house as a typical hall and chamber dwelling. The walls were made of split or riven clapboards. Cypress shingles, locally cut, were used on the roof. The hall was an all-purpose space. Most of the work, such as cleaning and other functions needing indoor space or a ready heat source, would have taken place in this room. Additionally, the hall provided a place for public or formal dining. This room would have been used as sleeping quarters for servants and visitors. The large hall fireplace was used for cooking. As constructed, the chimneys projected 4 inches into the rooms. This arrangement was designed to accommodate the placement of the brick walls that Matthew Jones planned to add later. The chamber was used as the principal sleeping quarters or bedroom for the master and his wife. However, unlike bedrooms later in the century, the chamber was probably also used for informal dining and for entertaining close friends. The fireplace was on a more domestic scale, reflecting its primary use for comfort. The house was fitted with the exposed decorative framing that was common in the Chesapeake during the 17th and 18th centuries. The plates and joists in the chamber are chamfered, while those in the hall are more decoratively molded. Joists in the hall are spaced 2 feet on center, while the others are another 6 inches further apart. Major posts tenon to the plate are spaced 10 feet with bevel lamp studs in between. Only the space between posts and plates was plastered. The decorative scheme and joist placements indicate the relative importance of the hall, even from the initial construction phase. A center door at the front of the house gave access to the hall. As the interior was stripped during the preservation, ghost evidence was revealed supporting the former presence of a 5-foot wide casement window in the front wall. It is likely that a small gable window was present next to the chimney, both on the first floor and in the loft. In 1727, Matthew Jones built a detached brick kitchen complete with name and date brick. Separate kitchens provided for social segregation, removed the kitchen and other work activities from the house, as well as giving a measure of fire protection. The bricks from this detached kitchen provided the material for the second floor addition during the Period 3 renovation. With the building of the detached kitchen, the large hall fireplace became obsolete, and Jones completed his work by making the fireplace smaller. Although Jones died before he could complete his overall plan for the house, his vision of an upscale Gentry home did become a reality through later efforts of his heirs. The Period 2 house, a direct descendant of the earlier frame house, was a modern dwelling of an upper-class planter. The entire first floor frame was replaced with brick walls still visible today. A Flemish bond pattern with all glazed headers was used to accent the brickwork. Gauged and rubbed jack arches, belt courses, window jambs, and corner bricks were used to further distinguish the house and give it a fashionable, articulated appearance. In all, this flashy new brickwork was representative of the finer craftsmanship then the rage in America. A 1729 to 1730 date is attributed to this work and is backed up by substantial scientific evidence. For a 1984 dendrochronology study, a total of 19 wood samples were taken. Dendrochronology is a scientific study of tree growth patterns used to determine the year a tree was felled. Combined with an understanding of insect infestation, an accurate date can be established. For this study, the timbers chosen included 2 joists from the second floor tower, 9 floor joists in the shed, and the sills that support the joists between the main block and shed. Through this study, it was determined that trees used to produce what we now know as Period 2 members were felled after they completed growing in 1729, but before the beginning of the 1730 growing season. The relative lack of evidence for insect infestation and fungus indicates that the trees were worked and used shortly after felling, probably the summer of 1730. In the second study, performed during 1986, architectural historians from colonial Williamsburg determined that the joists and two sets of rafter pairs in the tower were original to that feature. In this study, a total of 10 joists and 2 rafters were tested. For the tower, the best year of fit was again determined to be 1729. The Period II renovations were quite extensive and reflect cultural as well as architectural changes. Jones and many other Gentry planters throughout the region were seeking to establish clear hierarchical use of space and reduce the visual impact of what was deemed unsightly. As a result, the large fireplace in the hall was reduced in size to reflect its new domestic rather than work status. The hall became the principal room for entertainment and was meant to impress visitors. In keeping with this function and the rising social standing of the owner, the finish of the room was enhanced. A new mantel was added to the hall fireplace, and chairboards were installed along the walls. Evidence of the chairboard supports are still visible in the brickwork exposed during the preservation efforts. The house was further enhanced with the addition of second-floor fireplaces cut into the stacks of the original chimneys. The Period II renovations to the house also reflect the advent of the trend toward further room specialization and the desire for increased privacy within the 18th century home. The existing chamber was converted to a dining room. This new room was probably used by the family when dining alone. To afford the family an added degree of privacy, a shed or small single-story room was added to the rear of the original chamber. This new space now assumed the role as the principal chamber. The specialized dining room was a new concept, with the distinctions between the dining room and chamber evolving during this period. In keeping with the more genteel lifestyle of the family, direct entry into the family living spaces was no longer acceptable. A means of controlling circulation of visitors was needed. During this period, the standard method would have been to install a passage. However, there was insufficient space within the main block to accomplish this. Instead, a solution was found by using what seemed to be an old-fashioned element. A porch tower was added to the front of the house for this purpose. Any visitor would have been greeted here and then escorted further as appropriate. When the Reverend William Webb purchased the property late in the 19th century, the house had changed little since being rebuilt in 1730. Viewed in its current configuration, the house is essentially unaltered in form from its Period III, 1893 modernization. At that time, however, Reverend Webb was faced with a house in need of repair. His choices were to demolish the current dwelling and raise a new home on the site, or undertake an ambitious rehabilitation. Fortunately, for future generations, Webb elected to save the brick shell for its grandeur and allusion to the golden age of the 18th century, while gutting and completely remodeling the remainder of the house. Most of the early framing was removed, and a full second floor was added, permanently altering the look of the earlier dwelling. In fact, we now know that the Period III renovations were so extensive that not only was all trim removed, but the main block joists on both floors, partition framing, and the wall between the old dining room and shed were replaced. Still, clues to the 18th century remain. In the attic, 2 1729 joists were reused to carry rafters from the tower and help tie it to the new second floor of the main block. Another joist was reused as a sill and now carries the 1729 joists of the shed. Additionally, all new door and window trim and a completely finished interior were added. However extensive the 19th century alterations may seem, there was still enough timbers remaining to provide an adequate sample for dating. An accurate date for the Period III modernization can be substantiated in a number of ways. First, a physical investigation of the house reveals that the changes occurred in the late 19th or early 20th century. Examination of the framing used in the modifications shows it was cut with a circular saw and secured with machine-cut nails. The trim, surfaced on a machine planer, also utilizes cut nails. The back bands on the window interiors are late Italianate in design. This style was introduced in the latter half of the 19th century and survived until the turn of the century. The replacement of multi-light windows with 2/2 sash for better light would also indicate a 19th century adaptation. Beaded matchboard sheathing, which dates to the late 19th or early 20th century, has been used for the baseboards and stair enclosure, while stock 4-panel late Victorian doors replaced the originals. Combined, these items suggest the Period 3 renovation occurred sometime around 1900. Second, a review of the historical record undertaken to support a National Register nomination indicates that the changes occurred in 1893. Oral tradition suggests that it was in that year the early detached kitchen was demolished and the salvaged bricks were used in raising the house to 2 full stories. The bricks used in the remodeling are of an early character. They are handmade and include a fair amount of glazing. Additionally, it seems the date brick, which reads Matthew Jones, 1727, was reused and inset into the exterior front wall of the new second floor. Third, and most telling, are the results of dendrochronology. The American Institute of Dendrochronology performed studies to determine the dates of selected timbers in the Jones house. Using a process known as the key year technique, samples were extracted by coring sections of selected timbers in the house. These samples were then cross-dated by aligning key years discovered in the samples with an established area oak pattern. The results of this analysis show that trees cut for the rafters were felled in the fall of 1892, confirming the historical renovation date of 1893. When raising the exterior walls to 2 stories, the new brickwork was laid in 7-course American bond. The period 2, 1730 all-glazed header Flemish bond brickwork is quite evident below this work. The additional weight of the new second floor masonry walls caused the original plate in the rear of the house to fail over time. These wooden members were not initially intended to carry such a load. The resulting structural sag can readily be seen when viewing the back of the house. In the interest of preservation and safety, steel supports have been added to the house during the preservation work. Unseen from the outside, this network of steel columns and girders relieves the failed wooden plate of stress by effectively suspending the second floor. Where it couldn't be hidden within the walls or ceilings, the steel framing has been made unobtrusive, but left visible for study by students of preservation techniques. During the Period 3 modernization, the ceilings in the house were plastered. This is in contrast to the earlier practice of having exposed decorative joists. To complete the remodeling, matching wood mantels with flat pilasters and a wide undecorated frieze were installed on the first floor. Fire brick was added to the fireplaces for the first time, and a stair hall was created replacing the previously open stairway. In all, the 1893 modifications were quite extensive, yet the workmanship was of inferior quality. Later, modern conveniences such as electricity and plumbing were added, completing the period of renovation and modernization. While photographs of the Period 3 structure exist, it is only through the reading of the architectural evidence that a true picture of the house in its earlier configurations can be visualized. Because the Matthew Jones house contains so many unique architectural treasures, it stands as an irreplaceable cultural resource. As a result of its preservation, this house will provide future generations a glimpse not only of early building technologies, but of changes in their lifestyles and ambitions as well. the house, as an artifact, makes an important contribution to our understanding of the diverse history of our nation.
Now, by using the present building and ghostly plans, we can step back in time and construct the house in each of its periods.